Thanks, John. Well, I'm impressed. And I'm whistling as well. I'll stand this way a bit instead. Good. So I'm Paul Pester. I'm the CEO of TSB Banking Group. And Kerr came and asked me whether I'd be willing to talk about how I have apparently survived the building, listing, and actually as of yesterday, selling of TSB Banking Group. So this, I don't want to bore you stiff, especially after such a fantastic talk by John. So I'm going to canter through all of this stuff within a few minutes, and Abby's going to keep me on track and start waving to me when it gets to about 10 or 12 minutes. And I'll tell you how I basically spent I think it's 4 years and 1 month, not that I'm counting, going through this and trying to come out at the other end. So the TSB journey, to understand the TSB journey, you've got to start with a banking crisis. Back in 2008, we'll all remember this, the queues outside Northern Rock, the failure of Lehman's, the shock that really took over the world, and eventually the acquisition of HBOS by Lloyds TSB, as it was then, to create Lloyds Banking Group, and soon after that, Lloyds Banking Group requiring support from the UK government. That support from the UK government eventually became defined by the European competition authorities as being state aid. What does that mean? If you receive state aid, the European competition authorities have the right to impose penalties on you, and they're called penalties. And one of the penalties was published in November 2009, so Lloyds Banking Group had to sell and create and sell a new challenger bank in the UK. And that bank was to become ultimately TSB. So we started off on what was probably the worst kept secret codename project ever, Project Verde, to try and build TSB Bank and then separate it. So I started work on this in May 2011. My job was 4 of us initially, actually 5 of us initially, me and 4 others, was to design the bank, build the bank, and actually get the bank ready to operate as a separate business. Above my head, Lloyds Banking Group is trying to sell us, and it's an interesting environment to be in, where you're trying to build a bank, and then essentially your boss and a bunch of very well-paid investment bankers out there trying to sell you. And we were surprised as anyone else when we saw in December, I've gone too far, December 2011, can you go backwards for me, or do I need to do that? December 2011, that Co-op had been identified as the preferred bidder for this business. So then we enter into a really interesting period. So it probably would be a much more interesting talk if actually I talked about the relationship between us and Co-op, and the visits to Manchester, the discussions with the Reverend Paul Flowers, who you know was renowned for doing all sorts of interesting things. Discussions I had with him in backs of taxis and Chinese takeaways. Anyway, you'll have probably heard that there were all sorts of issues with the Co-op, and then eventually the deal collapsed, and it was an enormous shock to me when this deal collapsed, I have to say. I was walking into Lloyds Banking Group's main building, bumped into one of my team, the risk director, who had just come down on the lift from some meeting, and said to me, "Oh, have you heard the Co-op's pulled out?" I said, "What, you're kidding me?" And it was an enormous shock. At this point, we had about 4,000 people working on building the bank. So quite a big project. We were in the process of spending £1.6 billion to create the bank. And we had a team of but now we have nearly 9,000 employees. And at this point, we probably had about 6,000 employees. So an enormous shock on how you take those 4,000 people who've been building the bank towards one goal and then suddenly swap them around and get them focused on building something else. So straight from there, we moved into, I bet it's just not me that's having trouble with this mouse. We have been designing the bank specifically for the Co-op. The Co-op has said to us, "We like your bank, we like the fact that it's got what was essentially a £40 billion balance sheet, but it's too big for us, cut it in half and make it £20 billion. When the Co-op fell out of the transaction, big debates between us, Lloyds, UK government, around whether the bank that was left, that only had a £20 billion balance sheet, was big enough to compete. So in the middle of trying to build this bank, in the middle of trying to get it ready to launch, we had the Chancellor ask the Office of Fair Trading to do an investigation on us running through the summer of 2013 to help us assess whether we were going to have enough competitive impact on the UK market. And this is the result of that. This is the OFT writing to the Chancellor. This is a public letter, you can find it on the OFT website, where the OFT basically opined on our ability to compete. Good result from this is that we ended up with £500 million worth of profit enhancement over the first 3 years of our existence. Lloyds had to do certain things to help us compete. So we worked our way through that, and then we get ourselves towards September 2013, 9th of September 2013, 6 o'clock in the morning, and we launched TSB. So hopefully you've seen some of these ads, and you may have seen some of these. Whoops, with eventually me standing outside Baker Street, I have to say, being shocked by the amount of press coverage. So, we turned up at Baker Street branch at about 6 o'clock in the morning to get ready for what was meant to be a press opening, I come out of Baker Street at about 8:30 in the morning, and Baker Street was closed. There were so many journalists and so many TV cameras standing in Baker Street. I think this is my shock of walking out going, what the hell are you all doing? So it was quite an incredible launch for us. Soon after launching, we then had to do the IPO. So we launched in September 2013, and then we IPO'd the bank in June the 25th, 2014. If any of you have ever been through an IPO, you have some idea of the work that's required to prepare an organisation for an IPO, to produce a prospectus, to verify the prospectus, every word, every statement, everything you say in the prospectus has to be verified. There's a very interesting debate that goes on at this point between you and your selling shareholders. So your selling shareholders are trying to maximise the price they receive from selling their shares, but it's you as the directors of the new company that carry the obligation for delivering what you say in the prospectus. So of course, if you're a selling shareholder, you can say, fantastic business, it's going to make a fortune, it's going to take over the world, pay me 3 times its net book value. What do you say as directors who are responsible for delivering that? And so there are very interesting discussions. And some of the things you were talking about earlier about the sort of what I would consider as a fight or flight, we had many of those instances with our then owners, Lloyds Banking Group, before we eventually landed on this prospectus. At the end of the IPO process, you then have to go and sell your bank to a bunch of investors. So this is a snapshot of my diary. For the last 2 weeks of the IPO process, we were out talking to potential investors in London, in New York, and in Boston. And so you can see it's relentless. It started off at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, whatever it is, the 9th of June, with OpSIF, one of the big investment firms. There's a TV interview here somewhere, live broadcast from Sky TV. It is just relentless, and you have to go into each of these meetings and start off. You have investment bankers with you, you have lawyers with you. You have to say the same thing to every group of investors, because every investor has to have the same information. And there's nothing like real-time feedback. As you come out of these meetings and you get in the taxi or the car and you go off to the next meeting, the investment bankers are all checking their emails because the person you've just seen is deciding whether to put an order in for your stock or not. If you did a bad job, they'll forget it, they're not going to buy any stock. If you did a good job, they'll put a bid in for your stock. So it's nothing like real-time feedback, and trying to keep focus on that is key. 2 things I would pull out from this. This little meeting at the very end on the Thursday evening is probably the most significant one. So this is where we all disappeared off to UBS and basically had all of the orders for our shares from all of the various investment firms all around the world, not just the ones we had talked to, but various other investment banks have been speaking to other investors, and we get a whole list of their bids, and we choose what price to set our shares. So this was an incredible meeting. But the other important point on this, I would say, I still managed to go swimming here. I hope you note. I still have my swimming training on Thursday evening. I think I did actually make that training session. I didn't make the one here, which you'll see is in my diary, but I'll come to that later. And then we listed the bank, and then on Friday it was fine. We went across to JP Morgan and watched our shares being traded and went and did some TV interviews. And of course, this the easy bit is then going to the stock exchange, and this is our team at the London Stock Exchange. This is the day we started trading with a London Stock Exchange welcomes TSB. It's always the thing that worries me every time I look at this page is there's only 31,000 sellers and 1,000 buyers. I would love to have taken a picture when perhaps they were the other way around. So of course then you think, well, we're done. This has been a couple of years, we've listed the bank, it's now June 2013, 25th of June 2014 rather, we must be done by now. But then you're into the relentless quarterly reporting cycle. So next thing is in July, literally right after our IPO was doing our first H1 results for 2014. Then you're into, of course, Q3, then you're into the full year results, and then, shock horror, I get a phone call, literally 9:30 one Friday morning, it was the 27th of February, I'm in the exec team, meeting with Rachel, my HR director, and a bunch of other execs, and my PA comes running in. Really important call, you've got to go and speak to the chairman. So what's happening? I'm going to speak to the chairman, and we'd had a call approach from a Spanish bank. And it was a shock that this came in so quickly. It was more of a shock that it was basically about a week before I was due to go on holiday. And so I'm thinking, well, I don't know if it's a serious bid or not. How can I convince myself this is not a serious bid so I can go on holiday? Unfortunately, it did turn into a serious bid. And just 3 weeks later, so we were approached on Friday the 27th, and 3 weeks later we announced, almost to the minute, we were approached at 9:30, and this photograph was taken about 9 o'clock. 3 weeks later, we announced an agreed bid from Sabadell Banking Group for a £1.7 billion bid for TSB. Of course, then the world keeps going. You have to keep still delivering your quarterly results. So in the midst of all of this, we're still in April giving our Q1 results. and then bringing it, I guess, right up to speed. Yesterday, and it was literally yesterday, we announced the completion of the acquisition of TSB by Sabadell. So it has been an incredible rollercoaster ride. We picked the day that Greece chose to default on its debt to announce the completion just because we thought it would be interesting. So it was a real shock, I have to say. We had a sense that it may complete over the weekend, but of course all of us tracking very carefully what was happening as to whether it would knock the deal off track. So how do you survive that journey? That's a journey of 4 years and 1 month. I've enjoyed it, I have to say. But Kerr said to me, I've got to come and talk about stress and how difficult it is. So I have, what tips will I have, if I have any tips? All I can say is roughly how I approach life. It's not necessarily the case it's right for everyone. I don't pretend it's meant to be. But what do I try and do? Well, first of all, I focus on being as effective as I can be, as efficient. And you know what? I treat it to be an outside interest because it is only work. So what do I mean by effectiveness? I was interested in what Ian was saying earlier about the fact that you get lots of emails coming in, you have to deal with them. I ignore my emails. I know it's sacrilege to say that. I don't look at I have a computer on my desk, and it's quite nice. I know how to turn it on, and I look at it every now and then. And it's quite good for Google if I'm trying to do something, but I don't use it for anything else. I don't really know how to. So I don't look at my emails. I set my agenda, not my inbox. I have a fantastic PA and a fantastic EA. They know what's important to me. So I keep a short list of actions. Some of the best advice I ever had after I left McKinsey, the first real job I had, was the guy I was working for said to me, what you've got to do is write your priorities. Write your A list, write your B list, and write your C list. You take your C list and your B list and you tear them up and put them in the bin. And then you take your A list and you tear it in half. And you keep the top of your A list. And that's all you work on. And that's what I literally tried to do. So I tried to reprioritise that every day and design into my diary time to sort of stop. So what do I really try and do? Click. Whoops, that's far too far ahead. What I really try to do is, as it says here, focus on doing only the things that I can do. And I think if all of us think of that in our job, what actually are you meant to be doing in your job, as opposed to trying to do someone else's job? Efficiency, we get a really strong team. Never accept second best. All of you will know, and I was talking to Malcolm earlier about, I've got some problems in the team. I think Rome's there, the Rome's not there. Get rid of them. It's horrible to say, I know, but if you have someone in your team who's not cutting it, they're a black hole for your time. They will soak up your time and they'll kill you. So I'm glad I've got my HR director here. She's going to tell me off later, saying these sorts of things. But you have to have the best team you've got. Otherwise, you're committing yourself to spending your Saturday mornings fixing out the problems they've created, spending your Sunday afternoons fixing it out, spending your evenings doing it. Be relentless in getting the right team, but particularly your PA and your wonderful EA, of course. Insist on pyramid training, so there's McKinsey background training. All my execs, they hate me for it, I know, but it's quite nice, it's quite good fun. It's forcing on the pyramid principle. In other words, what's your so what? Give me the elevator pitch. I want to hear what you're telling me. In the time it takes to go from the 5th floor to the ground floor in the elevator, if you can't make your messages that concise, you don't understand the problem well enough. And of course, things like standard documents. We in our team constantly work on every front page has what's the problem statement, or what are the options, and what am I recommending. Just little things like that will really force the efficiency of the way you work. And limit your meetings from 8 to 6. If I'm in the office past 7, it's failure. And that's what I think, and that's what I say to my team. And then finally, trying to have some balance. It is only work. And trying to take that attitude that it is only work is really important. How do I get my balance, and why am I such a strong advocate of the work that Kerr is doing, is that I generally, for me, my balance comes from sport. So here's me as a 10-year-old. You can figure out which one I am. That one. So my father was the coach of a swimming team, so from about 5 years old I just started swimming in a swimming team. And there's one famous member of that team, that's Sharon Davis. So Sharon and I grew up together, did a lot of training together, and I have to say, the real thing for me is when I look at this picture, this guy in the top right-hand corner, Arthur Sandford, I can still remember his name. God. If I survived the coaching session or the training session, the sheer hell that he would put us through, through 2.5 hours worth of training 5 days a week, then anything that Lloyd's can throw at me or investment bankers can throw at me is actually pretty easy to deal with. So what was I doing the week after we did the IPO back to last June, trying to do a triathlon? And this is me actually on the right, really what it feels like to having done a triathlon right after having done the IPO. But I think more seriously for me, having a balance and trying to get away from it all. For me, the time I relax is when I'm running or when I'm swimming or when I'm cycling. And so yesterday we did announce the completion of the acquisition of TSB, but it didn't stop me when swimming training up at Swiss Cottage yesterday evening, because for me it's a way of giving a balance. And when I'm swimming up and down looking at the black line on the pool, the last thing I think about is work. It's a way of getting it all out of my system. So with that, hopefully within the allotted time, because Abby hasn't shouted at me, is how in theory we should have survived the designing, launching, listing, selling of TSB Bank. And with that, my handing to you, Kurt. Thank you very much.